Catus, Maximus here. This is just a short little kind of review, more of just a tear down, take a look inside. This is the Harbor Freight Chicago Electric 10 amp 7-inch polisher and sander. This thing's around 50 bucks and you get about what you pay for. It seems like it would be a good tool, but there's just a lot of inconsistency in the manufacturing. This one works okay, but there's just tons of reviews, various problems with the electronics failing. It's supposed to have a constant speed, so when you turn it on, and you can kind of hear it, as we speed up. Try that again. You can hear it slow down and then speed back up again. It's supposed to be load sensing, but that seems to vary. Doesn't seem to work as well as on higher end power tools. Load sensing means that when you have it at a lower speed and then you apply it to the surface, it detects that it's bogging down and actually applies more power dynamically. The other issues is dust getting into these controls where the buttons don't work anymore. It seems that the gears hold up, but there's just been a lot of issues with the controls and the electrics, and the fact that they did put a 10 amp motor in here. And people who attempt to use these for production use, you know, hours and hours and hours a day, some people have had luck, and some people, they just flat out burn up. They probably should have charged a little bit more, or just put a slightly lesser motor in it. If they would have put, say, and it really is 10 amps here, they put like a 7 or an 8 amp motor, they probably would have had better luck with this tool, and people wouldn't have had quite as high expectations as something like 10 amps. Otherwise, I mean, it was neat. Maybe they shouldn't have had this weird little display and instead put in better electronics and or just a dial, you know, load sensing dial variable speed. But for some reason, Harbor Freight got sucked into this one, which has a little display, which is probably what catches a lot of people. And that's an RPM. This is 1,000 to 3,500 RPM, so when you go up to 10, that's 1,000 and 1,500, etc. So anyway, I just wanted to talk about this a little bit. It is ball and needle bearing, you know. The power switch itself certainly feels pretty solid, but just wanted to make a video talking about this a little bit. This is something, since it works fine and it was only 10 bucks, or I only paid 10 bucks, I should say, that I'll end up using this more as just a polisher rather than a sander, although this one has been used as a sander and maybe it had some issues and they kind of resolved itself. I did a couple of simple load tests and it seemed to be okay. It actually, surprisingly enough, you could put a guard on this, although this isn't a grinder. Grinders tend to run much faster. Since this top speed is 3,500 RPM, a grinder would be much quicker, more along the lines of, say, 9,000. In this size, actually, it would be anywhere from 6 to 9,000 RPM. 9,000 would be a really fast 7-inch. 6,000 RPM is the standard, but it seems they're like increasing the speeds more on more modern grinders. So anyway, let's take a look inside this unit. So this will be pretty simple. I'm just going to take a look at the electrics, and then we'll take a quick look at the gears. I do like this little Makita driver. Well, the case is certainly on there pretty darn tight. Wow. I'm actually kind of surprised. There we go. Sorry about any background noise. I have the dishwasher going. Well, we can certainly see where the dust wanted to collect up in here. Pretty complicated control board. There's our display. There's our buttons. But we can see there's no protection These are just simple little switches that are used in just all sorts of electronics, video game controllers, or just about everything that has a little switch is one of these. And they haven't dust-proofed those at all. They're just standard old switches. No wonder it has so many issues. They did, you know, attempt. There is a pretty big, I guess it's a polyester capacitor. There's our power transistor or power circuit that regulates the power, and some kind of control chip hiding somewhere in here. They did put glue on the wires where they're soldered to the board, the motor wires. Oh, I see. Deep down in there is our little control chip. Quite a few surface mount components. And it really is supposed to be a true feedback constant speed. We have these big wires going to the motor. That seems pretty obvious. But then there's this plug with these two little wires. These two little wires here are actually going to a magnetic sensor, and you can see that white collar. There's actually a magnet in there, so it is monitoring the RPM as this thing is spinning around, and as it's supposed to detect the reduction in RPM and automatically increase the power output. So this is a true constant speed controller. It just, people have had real inconsistent results with it, even though it is a sensor feedback constant speed. That's actually kind of surprising. There's a lot of electronics in there. They're just not particularly heavy duty. And the worst part, once again, is just these little surface switches. Those things could easily get filled with dust. This is, you know, they should have had some kind of little boot or something on there to help protect that. So anyway, besides those comments, I mean, these switches can be replaced pretty easily. They are, let's say, universal size. It's just, it's a mighty oversight considering how much effort was spent on making a true constant speed controller. The brushes even seem fine. They use clock springs, which provide a nice constant tension throughout the wear distance of the brush. If we actually look down here, what we can see is two wires going to this. The brush has a copper wire embedded into it, so not only is it in a decent brass brush guide, it's low resistance to help, probably because of the 10 amp motor, to help increase power delivery. So to tell you the truth, I mean, everything else seems fine. Let's take a look at the gears. So the gears on a tool like this will be the same as angle grinders. It's just a set of bevel gears. I just want to see if they're helical cut or straight. And see if they use 2-ball bearings. I mean, they do have a shield here to try to prevent dust and grit. It isn't a complete seal, but it is a ring, and so it makes the gap very small and makes it so a dramatically less debris does get against the rubber seals. Rubber sealed ball bearings do have a seal, but it's only a single lip. And so if you have debris, sanding, dust, etc. building up against it, eventually it will still find its way in, just not as quickly as other gears. Well, they are helical cut. They did put quite a bit of grease in there. We can see the needle bearing in the top. And then there's our spiral gear. Not particularly oversized, but there just isn't a lot else to say. At least it is ball and needle bearing. Those 3 little holes are what the pin that locks the gear goes into. You know, don't hit that. I guess the only thing that kind of sets this apart is this gear actually has a pretty deep undercut and dish in there. I think that may be some aspect of attempting to make a little bit more space for more grease, and maybe to try to make the head a little bit more compact. Otherwise, they don't have a seal along here, which is unfortunate. It's not the biggest deal that they don't have a seal, because they're relying on this machine surface here and that little ring that kind of seats it to create a convolution, which does provide pretty good sealing. But if you run it hard and it's totally covered with dust, grease will slowly seep out, and then you'll have, what can happen is it heats up and then it cools down. There will be a slight vacuum. I mean, it will pull air in through some other portions, But there's always seems to be some way where sometimes debris can work in there. Not very many manufacturers put a seal in there. So once again, it's not that big of a deal, but it would have been a nice touch. Anyway, not a lot else to say about this tool. Besides, they do include a little flat here, like it's like a 5/8 or a little bit larger, for 15 millimeter pair of flats in case the wheel gets stuck. Usually not a big deal, but you do have the lock on it already. I mean, all the fasteners, these little fasteners are pretty cheap. For 50 bucks, it looks okay. It seems a lot of the issues are just the fact that quality control is lower on this tool, and the speed adjustment switch defect, and I'd call that a defect. They use just surface mount, you know, clicky switches, kind of like what not computer mice, they actually use better switches. Computer mice use better switches than what this thing has, and that's really the big crux of it, is dust gets into them and then causes it so that you can't activate the tool. That, and probably not quite enough airflow, probably too powerful a motor, especially when you're running it at lower speeds for long periods of time. So it's something you want to just periodically be aware of if you buy this cheap sander and polisher. I'm pretty much going to use it for polishing. I have other tools that are much more robust for sanding operations, so I'm hoping to at least get my money's worth out of it. Anyway, it does have decent ergonomics. It is, you know, kind of modern. Anyway, I really appreciate everybody who's been watching and subscribing. And if you haven't subscribed, please do. Till next time, Catus Maximus out.